Hello ladies and gents, it's EZScape, and welcome to my speedrunning movement guide for the Spyro Reignited Trilogy. This trilogy is a complete remake for the original games on the PlayStation 1 and runs on a completely different engine, which means many of the old movement options are no longer the same, as well as many new ones being introduced. To this day, I still see a lot of top runners not utilizing some of these strategies, so I put this video together for awareness and also to help out new runners. I hope you all enjoy. So let's start with the basics. For this section, I'm going to cover strategies that apply to all three games, then later on cover strategies that only work in Spyro 2 and 3. The first and most basic movement option would be jumping. Tapping X lightly gives you a short jump, and holding it longer gives you a high one. Oh, you already knew that? Who told you this guy?
In English. So,
hey, Spyro. Ripto smash.
I'm not a glide bitch.
Well, just remember when you're speedrunning, you'll want to use these jumps in a way to minimize airtime. Sometimes it's faster to full jump staircases, but sometimes the full jump isn't high enough to cover 2 steps and you'll have to use a short jump to get up the first step and a high jump to get up the next 2. Or sometimes you'll just want to bonk your way up a staircase. Yes, in this game, bonking after a glide or superfly can actually be beneficial in many ways because there's almost no downtime before being able to perform another action after doing so. Need to turn around quickly during a superfly? Just bonk into a wall. Need to get up a long staircase quickly? Just give Spyro a concussion. He doesn't care. It is worth noting that I'm only referring to bonks out of glides. Bonks from charging are still bad, so try to avoid them if possible. This leads nicely into our next basic movement option, charging. During a Spyro speedrun, at least 90% of your exploration will be done while charging, so it's important to know how to use it most effectively. Also, if you jump right after charging, you'll actually carry some of the charge momentum with you. This means you can actually jump much earlier than normal, allowing you to land back on the ground sooner from the combined momentum from the charge and holding forward on the D-pad. You can pretty much use this anytime you approach a surface you can't simply charge jump over. For those playing in Spyro 2 and 3, I really wouldn't attempt pairing a jump with charge momentum with a glide and hover, since you won't be able to get the full height from the hover. So just make sure you stop completely before trying to do so. Another new mechanic introduced with the Spyro Reignited Trilogy that wasn't in the original games is the ability to pivot in almost any direction shortly after a charge. In the original games, if you charge into a corner, in order to get out, we'd have to jump, slowly turn Spyro around in the air, and then charge away. But now with pivoting, we have much tighter control of our charging movement. Just in this clip that you're watching in the background, I used a total of 5 pivots to help turn around instantly, cut corners, and for slightly sharper turns. Another big difference with charging in the Reignited Trilogy is just how far Spyro can charge off a ledge before jumping. You can pretty much let Spyro's full body run off the ledge before pressing jump, and the jump will still go through. In most cases, this is useful since you get a much farther distance traveled, but at the cost of a little bit of height, so make sure to use it accordingly. Also, be careful to not get too greedy, otherwise if you wait too long before pressing jump, well, in a lot of cases, it will kill your run. And the last charging mechanic that isn't something necessarily new, but is definitely very different from the original games, is flame charging. In the Spyro Reignited Trilogy, flame charging was nerfed heavily, and gems no longer home in after flame charging gem containers. This is not to say flame charging is useless, because when you flame while moving forward, your flame will still follow Spyro, acting as an active hitbox which can be useful in a lot of cases. Luckily we do have pivoting, so we can still go after most gem containers, but flame charging them will usually never be considered fast, since the gems have to land on the ground first before sparks will pick them up. You can flame the containers and then jump into the gem, but this is only useful in a handful of areas. Also, compared to the original games, you do have a slight delay before being able to flame after charging. It isn't a long period of time, but if you flame too quickly, the flame will not come out. Learning the timing will come with practice to be able to maintain momentum from the initial charge. If you find it difficult to constantly move your thumb from square to circle, you can always use R2 instead to flame with the reignited control scheme. Alright, now that you know how to charge, it's time to spread your wings and glide. Yes, Spyro isn't very good at flying. You know, other than the cases which he is good at flying. But I digress. There have been a few changes to gliding introduced in the Spyro Reignited Trilogy, like the ability to auto-hover. Sometimes if you are just short of reaching a ledge with a glide, the game will perform an auto-hover, allowing Spyro to land safely. In pretty much all cases, this auto-hover will be quicker than a regular hover, so understanding the ledges that will regularly auto-hover is important. But you do have to be really careful about relying on them for getting on certain surfaces because sometimes they just aren't consistent, and there are even auto-hovers which can have the complete opposite effect of saving Spyro, and should be avoided at all costs. The next change of gliding is the ability to wall glide. This ability wasn't actually possible until the PC release of the game. We theorize that this is a bug with the frame rate changes because the higher your frame rate is, generally the easier a wall glide is. But many of them are still possible with only 30 FPS selected. Some useful cases of wall gliding are the North Cove end of level skip, Skilo's Badlands end of level skip, and a quicker way to reach this egg in Spyro 3. Not all slopes work with wall gliding, and there may still be much to be discovered using this trick, so feel free to get creative and explore. Another movement mechanic I'll be covering briefly is rolling. This used to be a movement option exclusive to the original Spyro 1, but in the Reignited Trilogy has now been made available to all games. I'm only briefly covering it because it isn't all that useful since the roll and air glitch was patched, and since like we already covered, if you need to move immediately sideways, you could just pivot. In a Spyro 2 40 orb run, it does save a very slight amount of time after breaking gem containers that leave Spyro parallel to a portal, to be able to simply roll into them, but I only use them roughly 3 times in a run. But just remember, they are there, and maybe you can come up with some instances where they're useful for yourself. The next strats I want to cover are Supercharge strats, which basically means using the power from a Supercharge power-up for a large duration of a level. Being able to handle the speed you gain from a Supercharge definitely comes with practice, and with glitches like level storage that allow you to Supercharge anywhere at any time, movement can get a little ridiculous. In order to stop his Supercharge, all you have to do is let go of the charge button, and Spyro will abruptly stop. However, if you let go while charging in the air, Spyro will continue charging until he lands on the ground. So in order to make Spyro stop, you have to cancel the Supercharge with a glide by pressing X, and then cancel the glide quickly by pressing the triangle button. You have to be really quick with this in Spyro 2 and 3, because if you don't press triangle quickly enough, you'll end up hovering instead of just canceling the glide. Next up is a strat that works in all 3 games. Anytime Spyro is moving where charging isn't required, like skating on ice, you can actually get much sharper turns by using the D-pad in conjunction with the right analog stick. Hey guys, it's Easy from the future. After doing some further testing, I found that using the right analog stick in conjunction with the D-pad does help with sharper turns while ice skating, but in other cases you'll want to use the left analog stick instead, like when turning this cannon. You can also bind additional keys to left and right inputs for even more directional influence. All of the areas this is useful for is unknown, but there may be more uses later on. Next up are strats that, of the time this video is posted, doesn't have very much development, which are mouse and keyboard strats. These strats aren't very developed because pretty much everyone plays the game with either a PlayStation or Xbox controller, since the game was initially released exclusively for console. Although I have found some usefulness in using the mouse in certain areas, specifically during the manta ray rides in Spyro 2. By raising my mouse DPI, I seem to get much sharper turns during the manta ray ride, and I've been finding myself much closer to the seahorse by the end of the challenge, which does save a bit of time. I'm not 100% sure if it's because of the mouse or not, but I do prefer it. It is also much easier to aim using a mouse than a D-pad, and at the very least using an analog stick is also better than the D-pad because aiming with the D-pad is terrible. I could see its usefulness in speedways, but that will most likely be for others to explore since I'm a Spyro 2 speedrunner, and we rarely have to go into speedways anyways. Next up isn't necessarily a movement mechanic, but just more of a basic strategy. I'm not sure when else I'll talk about it, so I'll just cover it now. Certain objects in Fodder continue to have hitboxes after hitting them, which can then be used to hit other enemies or other gem containers. For example, Spyro 1 runners use a hitbox from fan chests to break open other containers and kill enemies. There are a few other examples of Fodder kills in Spyro 2, which actually save time, like right here when I accidentally hit this beetle into this idol, or Aether hitting a pig into an earth shaper in Fracture Hills. The next trick is a movement mechanic exclusive to Spyro 1, and after this, we'll get into movement options exclusive to only Spyro 2 and 3. The trick is called Fairy Proxy. In the original games, a proxy was a result of Spyro not being able to fit in space during certain animations, so the game would propel him outwards, and Fairy Proxy seemed to be eerily similar. After claiming dragons, a fairy will appear to zap Spyro to set his checkpoint. If Spyro is underneath where the fairy spawns and jumps at the same time it appears, he will be able to gain a lot of height, allowing him to skip certain sections of the game. The height you gain is determined on the frame rate you're playing the game on, and the higher the frame rate, the higher Spyro goes. This is especially useful for skipping to the end of the level Town Square. Alright, now into Spyro 2 and 3 exclusives. The first little movement mechanic is pretty much only useful in Spyro 2, which is being able to charge jump while in water to move more quickly. This is made possible in Spyro 2 because at the start of the game, Spyro doesn't have access to swim, which means when he charges in the water, he won't dive. In Spyro 1, water kills Spyro, and in Spyro 3, he already knows how to swim, which is why they aren't useful in those games. This might also be useful in shallow water, where Spyro isn't able to dive, but I really can't think of where it's applicable outside of the first handful of levels in Spyro 2 before Bind Swim. Next is one of the most important mechanics in Spyro 2 and 3, which are perfect hovers. And what I mean when I say perfect hovers, they are hovers that are performed as quickly as possible to gain the max amount of height. Before I get into describing how to perform or practice them, I will recommend you set the game to 30 FPS, because higher frame rates actually make hovers shorter. I'm not exactly sure why, and it's really unfortunate that Spyro 2 and 3 speedrunners can't play in 60 FPS or higher, but that's just how it is. I'll be sure to update the pinned comment and description if an update is ever pushed to fix this. Anyways, how do you perform a perfect hover? The first level in Glimmer is probably the best place to practice perfect hovers. There's a lot of variety in the different hovers you need, and the difficulty scales greatly as you get more advanced with the technique. First we'll want to go to Glimmer Caves to the gem rock on the right. Position yourself in a way on the ground that you'll be able to land on the rock without having to adjust Spyro's position in the air. Make sure to hold the jump button to get a full jump and glide just before Spyro starts losing height. You don't want to glide too early because you may miss out on the max height, but more importantly, the time it takes before Spyro is able to hover is determined by how long he's in the air for. So if you wait the longest period of time before gliding, the sooner you'll be able to hover. You'll then want to practice the timing for being able to hover as soon as possible, because if you hover too early, you'll fall straight to the ground. This trick is very nuanced and will take a lot of time to master. Once you manage to get yourself onto this rock, we have our next jump, which allows us to skip obtaining climb to get the flight power up and orb challenge. If you attempted this jump before I explained anything, you'll see that it's much more difficult than the first one. This is because your standard glide and hover won't be enough distance to reach the ledge. So this time while you're jumping, hold forward before you glide to get Spyro a little bit closer to the ledge. Then glide and hover to land on the ledge. Once you're getting the hang of doing this, you should be all prepared to start doing 40 orb speedruns, which is a great beginner category. If you want an even bigger challenge, try to jump onto this pole next to Moneybags to skip pain for the bridge using the strategies you've already learned. The next best spot I can think of for practicing perfect hovers would be the Colossus end of level skip, which also includes a pretty difficult charge jump. Extra points if you can perfect hover from the ground to the statue, and then perfect hover from the statue to this platform. The next movement option comes after purchasing climb for Moneybags, which I call instant ladder regrab. Climbing ladders normally by holding up is pretty slow, so it's much faster to jump instead. But we can do even better than that. By holding backwards after jumping, Spyro will let go of the ladder and be in free fall, and you then can hold forward to regrab the ladder. This is much faster than just jumping up the ladder, because when you climb and jump normally, the game will still consider Spyro to be climbing, but also in the air. It takes a lot longer to jump after regrabbing, but by using this trick you can regrab the ladder quickly and jump instantly. This especially saves time in the last jump of the ladder, where instead of jumping on the edge at the end of it, you can jump backwards and glide towards wherever you're already headed instead. This saves time on almost every ladder in the game. Alright, and for the last movement option that I feel is worth covering is instant headbash. Normally when headbashing, Spyro will be at about the same height as a hover, which means the headbash will take a lot longer than what it could be when using this trick. To do it, you have to jump, charge downwards, and just before you touch the ground, press triangle to input a headbash. Since Spyro will be much closer to the ground before headbashing, the animation will be much quicker. However, if you're too late, the camera will most likely lock and you'll have to try it again. Also, when performing this, Spyro can't be moving forward in the air during the jump or the hover just won't come out. Alright everybody, I hope you enjoyed this movement tutorial. If this helped you out, be sure to leave a like as it's the best way to show support. If you have any questions, feel free to join the School of Spyro Speedrunning Discord server, and the members there will be sure to help you out. Also, feel free to follow me on Twitch, where I stream regularly, and you can ask me any questions there or on my own Discord server. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Subscribe for more speedrunning related content, and as always, I hope you have a beautiful life.